Joe Paterno was 23 years old when, in 1950, he was hired to work as assistant coach at Penn State University. He was brought on board by his mentor, Charles "Rip" Eagle. Paterno was born on December 21st, 1926, in Brooklyn, New York. Though he initially majored in law, nearly manifesting a fate as My Cousin Vinny decades before the film's release, once he was given the position of coaching at Penn State, he felt very much at home and came to regard professional sports coaching as his calling. He had a long history with football, having played it on the streets of Brooklyn. He was so intense and focused that once he went to catch a pass, he ran into a tree and split his lip. He believed he was destined to do great things, regardless of the nature of the pursuit. As far as football went, he was the quarterback of his secondary school's team, whose record of victories would further buttress Paterno's prospects of succeeding in athletics in some capacity. No player under his leadership could ever question his instincts as a coach. He knew the game intimately. During his early days as an assistant coach, he lived in one of the dormitories among several of the football players. He was the monitor, which meant that he was to report any kind of malfeasance, like a night of carousing, to Eagle. Eventually, Joe became known as Joe the Rat because of his proclivity for snitching. Joe didn't see it that way. The way he saw it, it was his job to ensure he got the very best out of his players. As he put it, you can't be a nice guy and do this job. As time would tell, that aphorism would become increasingly pervasive in his outlook, occasionally with wrong-headed decisions and tragic outcomes. His father once said to him, "Whatever you do, make an impact. Don't waste your life just winning football games. Have an impact." Joe Paterno's coaching and policies of personnel management would make an impact, all right, a devastating one. And the impact would be widely reported, though it would have nothing to do with all of the victories Penn State's football team achieved under his leadership. In 1959, he met Suzanne Poland, and they bonded over their love of literature. He was 31 years old, and she was 18. They soon married. They went on to have 5 children. In 1965, Eagle retired and Joe Paterno was promoted to head coach. He rejected an offer from Yale to be the head coach of Penn's team. 1969. After a line coach left the Penn State team, 2 new coaches were hired by Joe Paterno. The most noteworthy was Jerry Sandusky, who was in charge of tackles and tight ends. Given what he would be best known for years later, you could say the latter criteria would amount to double entendre in the most tasteless context imaginable. Sandusky had been a player at Penn State and was promoted to graduate assistant in 1966. Eventually, Paterno would promote him to the position of defense coordinator. Jerry Sandusky was a star football player in high school and was offered scholarships from several universities. He chose Penn State because of its pastoral setting. He also knew that one of his teammates in high school was a student there, so he would know at least one person among the student body. Speaking of the student body, he was a star athlete as a child and teenager. He met his wife while he was coaching a children's sports team. Like Joe Paterno, his life was steeped in sports. He majored in health education in college with the intention of becoming a gym teacher if he were never involved directly with professional sports. He and his wife were unable to conceive children of their own, so they took in foster children. Later they would adopt. When Jerry was made the defensive coordinator, he was essentially Joe Paterno's lieutenant. He was nobody's coffee bitch. He occupied the second rung down from the top of the hierarchy. It was about that time that he published a book called Developing Linebackers, which became a valuable instruction manual for football coaches. He used the profits he made from the sales of the book to start a charity called The Second Mile, which was incorporated in 1977. He ran the organization from his house. The purpose was to counsel and assist troubled youths, often in the form of involving them in athletics with the goal of helping them get their lives on track. With $64,000 he made from book sales, he bought 20 acres of farmland on which he built a group home for wayward kids. There was enough room to house 6 at-risk boys and the so-called house parents who would supervise the day-to-day operations. The first 6 boys moved in 1982. They were placed in the house by social workers. The organization eventually opened up offices in all of Pennsylvania's counties. It would soon receive donations on a regular basis. In addition to this, Sandusky ran a summer football camp for youth. When football was not being played or practiced, he would interact with the children, who found him to be a fun-loving and generally benevolent figure. To quote Guy Montecalvo, who volunteered at the camp, "The Jerry Sandusky I knew was a role model for what he did as a football coach and for the kids he reached out to at the second mile. He seemed to be one of the most compassionate and altruistic individuals I ever met." The second mile grew in prestige and prosperity by 1990, which was the year when President George H.W. Bush listed it among his 1,000 points of light. While Joe Paterno was hobnobbing with politicians, the second mile hosted an annual golf tournament, which typically raised millions of dollars. During one heightened period, the organization held $9.5 million in assets and $3 million in annual revenue. Among its board of directors were major figures from the world of sports and even actor Mark Wahlberg. Former Penn State linebacker Gary Gray said of Sandusky, "Jerry was like a saint up here. He was like a big kid. He was always touchy-feely." Matt Packness was a member of the coaching staff. Something about Jerry Sandusky's conduct didn't sit right with him. Packness had been abused by a neighbor as a boy, and he developed a radar for such people. Said Packness of Sandusky, "He was the Pied Piper. I remember kids being around him all the time. I never saw him do anything overt, but I always thought there was something weird about him. It was a boundary issue. He was always touching the kids. You cross the line when you touch kids. You don't put your hands on kids." Sandusky led the team to many victories, and he reached the peak of his effectiveness in that role in 1999. One day, Joe Paterno called him into his office and told him he would never recommend him for the position of head coach because he devoted so much of his time to the second mile. On July 1st, Sandusky announced his retirement. He issued this statement: "As the organization has grown, the demands for my hands-on involvement have increased dramatically." Then a retirement window opened up at the same time, and that made it more economically feasible to do something like this. Joe Paterno released his own statement about Jerry Sandusky. "We can't say enough about what he has brought to the football program as an exceptional coach, a fine player, and a person of great character and integrity. The success that the Nittany Lions have enjoyed over the last 3 decades is due in large part to the contribution of people on our coaching staff, like Jerry Sandusky. Jerry has always dreamed big dreams, and, as he's proven with the second mile, he's someone who can turn hope into reality." Penn State's athletic director, Tim Curley, made a statement about Sandusky that would prove to be unexpectedly ominous in the years to come. "His achievement as a human being is splendidly demonstrated by the thousands of youngsters he touches annually through the second mile." Upon his retirement, not only was Sandusky given a lump sum and a pension, but he was given access to all the school's athletic facilities to use at his leisure. Despite his retirement, he was given an office at the school. The end of his coaching career was capped off at the end of the Alamo Bowl, when he was doused with Gatorade and carried out to the middle of the field atop the players' shoulders. End that visage with a freeze frame and some soft music, and you've got a grace note. You would have thought the man was Saint Peter, and the second mile was the gates to heaven. Before the triumphant denouement of his coaching career, Jerry Sandusky was alleged to have engaged in an incident of sexual impropriety. In 1998, a woman contacted campus police. She was angry because her 11-year-old son, who had spent an evening with Jerry Sandusky at the campus, arrived home with wet hair. When she asked him how he got his hair wet, he told her he took a shower with Jerry Sandusky. She wanted Sandusky arrested. Her son dreamed of being a professional athlete. He had been mentored by Sandusky at the second mile for 4 years. He was being raised by a single mother, so she was initially glad that her son had a positive male role model in his life. Her son also told her that as Sandusky drove them to Penn State, he rubbed his thigh a few times. Sandusky showered with the boy, with which her son was very uncomfortable. He had never been in the company of a naked man before. He put as much distance between himself and Sandusky as possible, but Sandusky persuaded him to move back over to where he was showering, saying he warmed up the spot for him. Once the boy narrowed the gap between them, Sandusky grabbed him around the waist and said, "I'm going to squeeze your guts out." He bear-hugged the boy from behind, pressing his back against his chest. He lathered the boy's back with soap, took him into his arms, and lifted him up to the shower head for a rinse. Her son was so shaken by the experience, He broke from Sandusky's grasp as soon as he could, dressed in haste, and asked to be taken home. An investigation was launched, but no charges were filed, since though it was acknowledged that Sandusky's conduct in the shower was inappropriate, it was not overtly sexual. Sandusky denied that anything sexual took place. The administration took him at his word, since he was St. Jerry, founder of the Second Mile. No further actions were taken. 4 years later, he was still showering with boys at Penn State. Mike McQuery went into Penn State after hours one night. When he entered the shower area, he heard the sound of skin smacking against skin. There were sexual implications in that sound. When he looked into a mirror that offered a view of the shower, he saw Jerry Sandusky, naked, with a prepubescent boy, about 10 years old, who was also naked. Sandusky's hands were wrapped around the boy's waist. Everything about the interaction appeared to be sexual. To quote McQuery, "I believed Jerry was sexually molesting him and having some type of intercourse with him." He went on to say that though he did not see Sandusky's genitals, it was still obvious that a sexual interaction was taking place. When McQuery finished with his locker, he slammed the door shut. He walked into the shower area, hoping he had gotten Sandusky's attention. By then, Sandusky and the boy had broken apart. There was an awkward look among them, with lots of uncomfortable glances, but no words. To quote McQuery, "To be frank, I can't describe what I was feeling or thinking. Shocked and horrified, quite frankly, not thinking straight. I was distraught." McQuery had had a history with Sandusky. He was coached by him at Penn State. He was the adoptive father of 2 of his high school friends and college teammates. He was shocked to discover that someone he had trusted and who was so widely admired and respected for his charitable activities could inflict such horrific abuse on a child. McQuery was so stunned he couldn't act except to leave the room. After he returned home, McQuery conferred with his father and a colleague of his father. He was advised by them to report the incident to Joe Paterno. After McQuery told Paterno what he saw, Paterno said he was sorry McQuery saw what he saw, and went on to say that he did the right thing by reporting the incident. He vowed to take action. McQuery met with Joe Paterno and the athletic director to report what he had witnessed in the showers. When they relayed his findings to the president of the school, they characterized Sandusky's interactions with the boy as, quote, horsing around and, quote, horseplay, as if it were nothing but a harmless wrestling match. It was clear that Jerry Sandusky was being protected at Penn State. He had emeritus status, which made it so that he would be difficult to take down. Eight years later, a state trooper was running a background check on Jerry Sandusky when he stumbled upon a blog post about the child molestation allegation. A formal investigation began after the identity of the author of the blog post was ascertained and he was contacted. There is another tale to be told about the mother of an 11-year-old boy who was mentored by Jerry Sandusky through his involvement with the Second Mile. The boy had a sister and a mother, but no father to speak of. A school counselor recommended the charity to her since her son was, as they say, at risk. Her son was soon taken under the wing of Sandusky, who befriended and bonded with the boy in short order. He gave him many gifts that the boy greatly enjoyed. The boy's mother was unaware that Sandusky had been accused of sexual misconduct with prepubescent boys on 2 occasions. While her son found the attention Sandusky lavished on him to be endearing, some other aspects of Sandusky's behavior was more unnerving. Sandusky was very physically affectionate and loving in both word and deed. His mother was certainly uncomfortable about it. Sandusky started to show up unbidden, sometimes even picking up her son from a bus stop as he waited for his commute to school so they could, quote, chat. Sandusky would also play the role of paternal figure when the boy got into trouble. She let it all slide, however, since she was pleased that Sandusky was compensating for the failures of the boy's father in the way of being present in the boy's life. Eventually, the boy began to complain about other aspects of Sandusky's behavior. For instance, he became controlling. Initially, she chalked it up to the fact that her son had become a teenager and it was natural for boys that age to rebel against authority figures. Her son told her he wanted to put some distance between him and Jerry Sandusky. It was then that she knew that there had to be something wrong. He told her that after he stopped attending second mile events, Sandusky would start visiting him at school. What really set off alarm bells in her mind was when her son told her he wanted to look up, quote, sex weirdos on the internet in a conversation about Jerry Sandusky. His mother contacted his school to find out just how often Sandusky was visiting him there. They revealed that he was spending an immoderate amount of time at the school. He would buttonhole her son for private one-on-one conversations during and after school. One Friday in spring of 2008, the woman was summoned to the principal's office of her son's high school. She was alarmed to find her son crying and curled up in the fetal position on a chair. The principal informed her that her son broke down and cried as he disclosed that the founder of the Second Mile charity had been sexually abusing him for years. After learning about some of the more salacious details, she asked her son why he hadn't revealed the abuse to her sooner. He told her he was afraid of Sandusky. He was also afraid that nobody would believe him, as he said to her, "I didn't know what to do. You just can't tell Jerry no." His mother wanted Penn officials to contact the police, but the administration was too concerned about sullying Sandusky's reputation, so she filed a report in collaboration with a friend who worked with social services. The grooming process carried out by Sandusky on her son was not merely generous, it was lavish. He would buy him things like golf clubs, a computer, clothing, or simply give him cash. He gave her son things his mother could never afford. Sometimes her son would spend the night at Sandusky's house. At some point, Sandusky would enter the basement room where her son stayed and offer to, quote, crack his back. As her son described it, Sandusky got into bed with him and rolled them around until they were face to face, with Sandusky on top. Sandusky would run his arms along the boy's back, with this action being the so-called cracking. This interaction occurred almost every time her son visited the Sandusky homestead. As the boy aged into adolescence, Sandusky started to blow on his stomach. From there, he began to kiss him on the mouth. This made her son so uncomfortable, he would hide in the basement to avoid Sandusky. The boy reported that it was in 2007 when the oral sex began. He said Sandusky performed fellatio on him about 20 times over the course of 2007 and 2008. On one occasion, he forced the boy to reciprocate. The boy also reported that Sandusky touched him in ways that were inappropriate. These incidents took a toll on the boy's mental health, as he was imbued with feelings of self-loathing and shame. He couldn't take it any longer. He needed to purge Sandusky from his life. He asked his mother to tell Sandusky he wasn't home when he called. Unfortunately, decreasing his availability to Sandusky was not the cure-all he hoped for. You see, Sandusky had been volunteering as a football coach at the high school where the boy was beginning classes as a freshman. Sandusky was so appreciated for lending his expertise to the school's athletic program free of charge and for mentoring some of the male students through the second mile that his reputation deflected allegations of impropriety with a Teflon sheen. In fact, the faculty of the school trusted him so much, they allowed him to pull individual students out of class for what he called counseling sessions. Meanwhile, he was destroying the mental health of many of his charges. A year before the boy reported the abuse, someone bore witness to one of the incidents. One day in the gym, the boy was trying to ascend upwards on the rock-climbing wall, only he kept falling. On one of the occasions when he fell, he lay sprawled on the mat for a moment. Sandusky was with him, and he leapt on top of him. They came face to face and rolled around a little. When that petered out, Sandusky lay facing him with his eyes closed. Joseph Miller, the school's wrestling coach, entered the room while retrieving an item he needed. He noticed the light was on. When he walked in, he saw the boy and Sandusky laying side by side, with very little space between them. When Sandusky saw Miller, he jumped up and said, "Hey, coach, we're just working on wrestling moves." Miller found all this confusing, since Sandusky was not involved with the wrestling program. The boy said nothing to Miller. Sandusky warned him to keep their sexual interactions a secret and that nobody would believe him if he did tell somebody. In an interview with the Harrisburg Patriot News, the boy's mother said of this situation, "I'm infuriated. Even if they had the slightest inclination that anything inappropriate was going on, it should have been reported, or at least brought to my attention. I didn't even know he was leaving the school with my child, taking him out of classes. They never told me that." The mother and school officials reported Sandusky's conduct to legal authorities. He was banned from the high school. Soon, Corporal Joe Leader, an officer with the state police, carried out an investigation. Nobody connected to Penn State or the second mile could run interference for Jerry Sandusky this time. The reports about Jerry Sandusky's sexual impropriety with minors went back about a decade, so Leader had his work cut out for him. Joe Leader had yet to accumulate enough evidence to obtain a warrant for Jerry Sandusky's arrest, but after all his experience on the force, Leader had a hunch that Sandusky was a sexual predator who needed to be stopped. Pronto. He interviewed the boy who was abused for 4 years. He noted the typical grooming process that is employed by pedophiles to ingratiate their way into the victim's life, building up trust along the way. The abuse began after all these special gifts and trips. Without a father around to protect the boy from predators, the young man was vulnerable, and Sandusky exploited that vulnerability so he could capitalize on it sexually. Leader also recognized the threat of disbelief in the event that the boy might report the abuse. As far as pedophiles go, Jerry Sandusky was not atypical. Leader read Sandusky's book, ominously titled Touched, The Jerry Sandusky Story. There was one passage in particular that stuck out to him as a possible indication of impropriety. The passage went as follows: I thrived on testing the limits of others, and I enjoyed taking chances in danger. I had a personal law, Jer's Law, that I stuck to when I was growing up, and I still abide by that law today. I allowed myself to be mischievous, but I didn't let it get to the point that someone would be intentionally hurt. And I swore I would tell the truth if I was ever caught doing something wrong. That law has certainly been tested through the years, and just because it is a law doesn't mean it has kept me out of trouble. Sandusky published the real names of some of the boys he mentored through the second mile, and there were some photos of him with the boys. One boy told Leader that Sandusky rubbed his leg as he was driving him and other second mile boys to Philadelphia to attend an Eagles football game. It was through that first boy that he was able to get the names and contact information of other second mile victims. One boy told him about how he trusted Jerry Sandusky and enjoyed their time together, until Sandusky introduced sexual abuse to their interactions. It graduated to sexual contact through hugs and wrestling matches and other aspects of Sandusky's approach. The boy submitted to the sexual abuse because he felt he had to compensate Sandusky for all that he had given to and done for him. Because of this, the boy felt ashamed of himself. The shame was based on the illusion of complicity that Sandusky established in the boy's mind. Up to that point, nobody ever told the boy that he was nothing but a victim, and that Jerry Sandusky never had consent to do what he had done to him. The boy felt betrayed. Then, at some point, Sandusky suddenly disappeared from his life. This is not unusual for pedophiles, as they usually have a preference for victims of a specific age range. The boys who were interviewed by Leader were always reluctant to open up about the abuse. The stories were all similar: the same grooming process, the gradual advance of physical contact from friendly pats on the back to wrestling and sexual abuse, all in stages. Just like his work as a football coach, which involved planning and strategy, Sandusky approached the abuse cautiously, covering all contingencies. He was conniving but careful. He didn't just groom his victims. He groomed the community with the second mile. He established a public persona that was sure to instill disbelief in the minds of anybody who might hear that he was a sexual predator of children. He would observe his victims for up to 2 years before he took action. The boys never had a father figure around. Sandusky's words and gestures of love and support were badly needed, and the boys' emotional needs were satiated. He started with their emotions, and once he forged that bond, he would take advantage of the trust they had in him to introduce sexual abuse. The rubbing of their leg in the car was the litmus test Sandusky used to see if he could graduate to other inappropriate physical gestures. If the boy didn't resist, Sandusky would misinterpret his passivity as consent. If the boy was recalcitrant, he would receive no more treats and affection from Sandusky. It was not unconditional love. Just as disturbing, later discovered that officials at Penn State and the Second Mile were aware of multiple allegations of sexual misconduct involving Jerry Sandusky as the perpetrator against underage boys, but did nothing. Even after Sandusky was caught showering with boys on 2 occasions, nothing was done to report and or alleviate the behavior. One of the 10 boys who cooperated with the investigation reported the typical grooming process. Sandusky began molesting him by putting his hand on his thigh throughout the duration of a trip in his car. Eventually, the boy became so uncomfortable with this, he would try to put as much physical distance from Sandusky in the car as possible. Eventually, Sandusky took the impropriety to the next level by putting his hand down the boy's pants. This the boy could not accept, and he would pull away from him immediately. Getting touched in the car was a commonality among Sandusky's victims. One victim gave a statement as an adult. As a child, he was mentored by Sandusky. One day, Sandusky took him to a sauna. He pressed his chest and body against his back and then pushed him away. Afterwards, Sandusky proposed that they take a shower. The victim was not too keen on providing Sandusky with a view of full frontal nudity, so he stood a distance away from him and showered with his back facing Sandusky. At one point, he looked over his shoulder and saw that Sandusky had an erection. The boy knew nothing about sex, so he simply reacted with confusion. Within seconds, Sandusky's body made contact with his from behind, and he started rubbing the boy's arms and shoulders. The boy tried to slip out of his embrace. Sandusky pushed him up against a corner wall. He took the boy's hand and placed it on his erect penis. The boy was deeply disturbed by this action and tried to pull Sandusky's hand away. The boy departed from the shower and dried off. He asked Sandusky to take him home. He never let Sandusky touch him again. It was at that point when Sandusky abandoned him. This, after Sandusky vowed to police and the welfare department that he would never shower with a boy again. Another young man reported an incident that took place after a private workout with Sandusky. They showered together, and the boy put as much distance between himself and Sandusky as he could. Sandusky laid a guilt trip on him to make the boy feel bad about not embracing Sandusky's embrace. Sandusky patted him down, rubbed soap on his shoulders, shampooed his hair, and kept him close to his body with a bear hug. All the while he was aroused. When the boy spent the night at Sandusky's house, Sandusky would invade his bed at night to give him shoulder rubs, blow on his stomach, and touch his genitalia through his shorts. The boy turned over to break from the latter violation. The janitorial staff of Penn State told investigators they had witnessed Sandusky sexually abusing a boy. They saw Sandusky with a boy who looked to be about 13 years old, naked in the showers with him. One janitor said he saw Sandusky, quote, holding the boy up against the wall and licking him. He said he also witnessed Sandusky performing fellatio on the boy. He didn't report the incidents because not only did he know that Sandusky was protected by his status at the school, and he was therefore impervious to prosecution, but the janitor also feared he would lose his job if he did report his findings. Another boy reported the typical grooming patterns. At one point, when he was spending the night at Sandusky's home, he was forced to perform oral sex on him. Sandusky tried to sodomize him on 16 separate occasions. Sometimes Sandusky successfully penetrated him. The boy screamed for help because he knew Sandusky's wife was upstairs. She did not respond. There were occasions when Sandusky would take him to a hotel that featured a pool, jacuzzi, and workout machines. When they used the pool in the absence of anybody else, Sandusky would expose his erect penis to the boy. This, after Sandusky told him he loved and cared about him, but also told him to keep the sexual component of their relationship a secret. Another victim related the typical grooming process, which led to private interactions. On one such occasion, Sandusky pulled the boy's shorts down and performed oral sex on him. The boy was disturbed by the act, but whether Sandusky was aware of the boy's reaction or not, there were other such incidents. He even forced the boy to perform fellatio on him. He said he was touched inappropriately by Sandusky in an outdoor pool, and that Sandusky would also touch his crotch while horsing around in the water. At some point, Sandusky exposed his penis to the boy while they were in his car. He asked the boy to fillet him. The boy refused, and with that, the relationship screeched to a halt. A grand jury was assembled to oversee the Sandusky case. The victims did not have exact dates and times for the incidents when they were abused, but nobody doubted their sincerity as they testified. Joe Paterno did a pre-interview. He said he was aware of the allegations, but did not witness any acts of impropriety. He mentioned having a meeting with Mike McQuery. He said McQuery told him he had seen Sandusky, quote, fondling, whatever you might call it. I'm not sure what the term would be. A young boy. He acknowledged that it was a sexual interaction. He said he had never discussed sexual impropriety with Sandusky throughout the 40 years they had known each other. Paterno stated that he reported the allegation to the athletic director. The athletic director denied hearing of any such allegation. Gary Schultz, a legal official representing the university, acknowledged that he had heard the accusation and that the solution of disallowing Sandusky from bringing second-mile boys to the campus was a solution that was widely accepted. November 5th, 2011. Jerry Sandusky was in handcuffs. Flanked by state troopers, he was a spectacle for the news cameras that were waiting. He was led into a court building where he was booked on criminal charges for sexually assaulting 8 boys from the second mile over a span of 13 years. 2 more victims would press charges at a later date. The judge not only knew Jerry Sandusky, but had volunteered for the second mile. You can imagine the shock he must have felt as he announced that Sandusky was charged with 40 criminal counts, including involuntary deviant sexual intercourse, unlawful contact with a minor, endangering the welfare of a child, corruption of minors, and indecent assault. The maximum sentence for these charges, were he to be convicted, was 565 years in prison and $600,000 in fines. Sandusky pled not guilty through his attorney. Prosecutors requested that bail be set at $500,000. He made bail at $100,000. It was an unsecured bond, meaning he signed a document stating he would not flee the area and would show up to future court proceedings. The prosecutors felt a man facing such accusations should be made to wear an electronic ankle monitor, but he was not. Jerry Sandusky was not the only one to face charges in connection to this case. Athletic Director Tim Curley and Senior Vice President for Finance Gary Schultz were both charged with perjury for making false statements to a grand jury. They were also charged for their failure to abide by the Child Protective Services law, which requires that school officials report accusations or reports of child abuse within 48 hours. It was incumbent upon them to surrender within 2 days for booking. Conviction could have brought a maximum penalty of 7 years in prison and a fine of $15,000. They both pled not guilty. Pennsylvania Attorney General Linda Kelly made this statement about the actions of the accused. This is a case about a sexual predator who used his position within the university and community to prey on young boys. It is also about high-ranking university officials who allegedly failed to report the sexual assault of a young boy after it was brought to their attention, and later made false statements to a grand jury that was investigating a series of assaults on young boys. The failure of top university officials to act on reports of Sandusky's alleged sexual misconduct, even after it was reported to them in graphic detail by an eyewitness, allowed a predator to walk free for years, continuing to target new victims. Equally disturbing is the lack of action and apparent lack of concern among those same officials and others who received information about this case, who either avoided asking difficult questions or chose to look the other way. None of the victims were aware that others had experienced the abuse. An attorney for a victim whose identity was protected and referred to as Victim 6 described his client's reaction to hearing about what happened to the others. He cried. He didn't cry for what had happened to him. He cried for the others. University President Graham Spanier issued this PR missive. The allegations about a former coach are troubling, and it is appropriate that they are investigated thoroughly. Protecting children requires the utmost vigilance. I have known and worked daily with Tim and Gary for more than 16 years. I have complete confidence in how they have handled the allegations about a former university employee. Tim Curley and Gary Schultz operate at the highest levels of honesty, integrity, and compassion. I am confident the record will show that these charges are groundless and they conducted themselves professionally and appropriately. The CEO of the Second Mile, John Rakovitz, issued a statement of his own. All of us at the Second Mile are shaken. This clearly is a difficult time for Jerry and his family, for all other involved parties, and for the Second Mile. However, the Second Mile clearly understands our highest priority must continue to be the safety and well-being of the children participating in our program. At no time was the Second Mile made aware of the very serious allegations contained in the grand jury report. This, after the organization was briefed about incidents that occurred in 1998 and 2002. Joe Paterno issued his own statement. If true, the nature and amount of charges made are very shocking to me and all Penn Staters. The fact that someone we thought we knew might have harmed young people to this extent is deeply troubling. If this is true, we were all fooled. along with scores of professionals trained in such things, and we grieve for the victims and their families. They are in our prayers. As my grand jury testimony stated, I was informed in 2002 by an assistant coach that he had witnessed an incident in the shower of our locker room facility. It was obvious the witness was distraught over what he saw, but he at no time related to me the very specific actions contained in the grand jury report. I understand that people are upset and angry, but let's be fair and let the legal process unfold. In the meantime, I would ask all Penn Staters to continue to trust in what that name represents, continue to pursue their lives every day with high ideals, and not let these events shake their beliefs in who they are. Curley and Schultz surrendered. Their bail was set at $75,000 each. Joe Paterno was fired. Some of his supporters protested and even rioted. Such was a testament to how revered he was as a coach. Mike McQuery was put on leave as a member of the coaching staff because he had received several death threats. Rodney Erickson was sworn in as the interim president of Penn State. He vowed that the institution would conduct its affairs with more transparency. He wanted to ensure that nobody would ever feel that they were prevented from doing the right thing. Jerry Sandusky did an interview with Bob Costas for the news magazine show Rock Center. This is that interview.
Sandusky, there's a 40-count indictment. The grand jury report contains specific detail. There are multiple accusers, multiple eyewitnesses to various aspects of the abuse. A reasonable person says where there's this much smoke, there must be plenty of fire. What do you say?
I say that I am innocent of those charges.
Innocent? Completely innocent and falsely accused in every aspect?
Well, I could say that, I have done some of those things. I have horsed around with kids. I have showered after workouts. I have hugged them, and I have touched their leg without intent of sexual contact. But so if you look at it that way, there are things that wouldn't would be accurate.
Are you denying that you had any inappropriate sexual contact with any of these underage boys?
Yes, I am.
Never touched their genitals, never engaged in oral sex?
Right.
What about Mike McQuery, the grad assistant who in 2002 walked into the shower where he says, and specifically 10 or 11 years old, that his hands were up against the shower wall and he heard rhythmic slap, slap, slapping sounds, and he described that as a rape?
I would say that that's false.
What would be his motive to lie?
You'd have to ask him that.
What did happen in the shower the night that Mike McQuery happened upon you and the young boy?
Okay, we were showering and horsing around, and he actually turned all the showers on and was actually sliding across the floor, and we were, as I recall, possibly like snapping a towel and horseplay.
In 1998, a mother confronts you about taking a shower with her son and inappropriately touching him. Two detectives eavesdrop on her conversations with you, and you admit that maybe your private parts touched her son. What happened there?
Well, I can't exactly recall what was said there in terms of what I did say was that if he felt that way, then I was wrong.
During one of those conversations, you said, I understand, I was wrong, I wish I could get forgiveness, speaking now with the mother. I know I won't get it from you. I wish I were dead. A guy falsely accused or a guy whose actions have been misinterpreted doesn't respond that way, does he?
I don't know. I didn't say, to my recollection, that I wish I were dead. I was hopeful that we could reconcile things.
Shortly after that, in 2000, a janitor said that he saw you performing oral sex on a young boy in the showers in the Penn State locker facility. Did that happen?
No.
How could somebody think they saw something as extreme and shocking as that when it hadn't occurred, and what would possibly be their motivation to fabricate it?
You'd have to ask them.
It seems that if all of these accusations are false, you are the unluckiest and most persecuted man that any of us has ever heard about.
Oh, I don't know what you want me to say. I don't think that these have been the best days of my life.
Sandusky's attorney, Joseph Amendola, insists the charges filed by the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, listing 8 victims, will not hold up.
You said a few days ago, much more is going to come out in our defense. In broad terms, what?
We expect we're going to have a number of kids. Now, how many of those so-called 8 kids, we're not sure, but we anticipate we're going to have at least several of those kids come forward and say, this never happened. This is me. This is the allegation. It never occurred. In fact, one of the toughest allegations, the McQuery violations, what McQuery said he saw, we have information that that child says that never happened. Now grown up. Now person's in his 20s.
Until now, we were told that that alleged victim could not be identified. You have
by the Commonwealth.
You have identified?
We think we have.
So you found him. The Commonwealth has not.
Yeah, interesting, isn't it?
Would you allow your own children to be alone?
Quite honestly, Bob, that's why I'm involved in the case. If I thought
you believe in his innocence, not just that you can mitigate his guilt. You believe in his innocence.
I believe in his innocence.
Meanwhile, the man who helped Joe Paterno win national championships is now at the center of a scandal that's brought his old boss down.
To your knowledge, did Joe Paterno have any information regarding objectionable activities on your part prior to that report in 2002?
I can't totally answer that question. My answer would be no.
Did Joe Paterno at any time ever speak to you directly about your behavior?
No.
Never?
No.
He never asked you about what you might have done? He never
No.
asked you if you needed help, if you needed counseling?
No.
Never expressed disapproval of any kind?
No.
How do you feel about what has happened to Penn State and to Joe Paterno and to the Penn State football program and your part in it?
Well, how would you think that I would feel about a university that I attended, about people that I worked with, about people that I care so much about? How do you think I would feel about it? I feel horrible.
You feel horrible. Do you feel culpable?
I'm not sure I know what you mean.
Do you feel guilty? Do you feel as if it's your fault?
No, I don't think it's my fault. I've obviously played a part in this.
How would you define the part you played? What are you willing to concede that you've done that was wrong and you wish you had not done it?
Well, in retrospect, I shouldn't have showered with those kids. So.
That's it?
Yeah, I mean, that's what hits me the most.
Are you a pedophile?
No.
Are you sexually attracted to young boys, to underage boys?
Am I sexually attracted to underage boys? Sexually attracted? No, I enjoy young people. I love to be around them. But no, I'm not sexually attracted to young boys.
Obviously, you're entitled to a presumption of innocence, and you'll receive a vigorous defense. On the other hand, there is a tremendous amount of information out there, and fair-minded, common-sense people have concluded that you are guilty of monstrous acts, and they are particularly unforgiving with the type of crimes that have been alleged here. And so, millions of Americans who didn't know Jerry Sandusky's name until a week ago now regard you not only as a criminal, but I say this, I think, in a considered way, but as some sort of monster. How do you respond to them?
I don't know what I can say or what I could say that would make anybody feel any different now. I would just say that if somehow people could hang on until my attorney has a chance to fight, for my innocence. That's about all I could ask right now. Obviously, it's a huge challenge.
A Pennsylvania lawyer named Andrew Shubin issued this statement after the interview was aired. Our investigation reveals that Sandusky is an unrepentant child predator. He caused incalculable devastation to children, their families, and our community, and is continuing to do so through his attacks on the victim's credibility. Victim rights attorney Justine Andronici expressed her outrage in this statement. These statements play on the victim's worst fears, that if they stand up and tell the truth, they would be called liars and victimized again. Pedophiles seek to silence their victims with the threat that no one will believe them if they come forward. Perpetrators of sexual abuse also maintain manipulative, long-term contact with their victims for the very purpose of continuing to silence them. This is from an interview Sandusky did with the New York Times.
Okay, these allegations are false. I didn't do those things. I don't know what else to say.
Last month, former Penn State assistant football coach Jerry Sandusky was arrested on charges of sexual abuse of children. Since then, other questions have emerged. What did officials around him know, and what did they do? This is Joe Becker of the New York Times. I sat down with Sandusky several times this week at the home of his lawyer, Joseph Amendola. We spoke not only about the allegations and the university, but also about Second Mile, the charity he founded, and his feelings toward the children that it served. Portions of my interview were captured on camera, but others only in audio. I talked to Mr. Sandusky about some of his activities with children of Second Mile. I think that some people think taking a kid overnight trips to a game, being in a shower with a kid that isn't your own, that has been alarming to some people, those facts. And I think what I heard you say is you didn't see it as like somebody else's kid. You saw it more like these kids are part of my family. Is that?
And they, so many of them would say that.
But is that?
That was a mutual feeling, a family. Like feeling. It was, it was an extended family. We were an extended family, an extended father.
But is that why you didn't have the kind of barriers or red flags up that somebody else might, say, I don't want to be alone in a room with a kid? I mean...
Yeah.
In a grand jury report released last month, Sandusky was charged with 40 counts of sexually abusing young boys. In 1998, an investigation was launched by university police and the state child protection agency. A mother claimed Sandusky had hugged her 11-year-old son while showering with him in a Penn State locker room. I asked Sandusky about the extent of that investigation.
I was talked to once.
By an officer?
By one person from Children and Youth and by...
And an officer. And that was it?
Yeah.
And as far as you know...
And bang, right after that, then we got an unfounded report. That was within a couple days, I think.
Law enforcement officials closed the investigation, and it appears no further action was taken by the university. Sandusky said the university president never confronted him. Neither did his boss, Joe Paterno, Penn State's legendary head coach.
How could Coach Paterno and Graham Spanier not know that one of the star coaches on the football team, at least was being investigated?
I don't know that he didn't know. I know that he never said anything to me. I know that.
In 2002, there was another incident in the locker room showers. An assistant football coach, Mike McQuery, has testified to the grand jury that he witnessed Mr. Sandusky sodomizing a young boy, and that he reported some version of that scene to Mr. Paterno the following day. Paterno has testified that he then informed the university's athletic director, Tim Curley, that Sandusky had done something sexually inappropriate with a young boy. Curley, who has been charged with lying to the grand jury, testified that he was told that Sandusky was inappropriately, quote, horsing around, unquote, with a boy in the shower. Curley met Sandusky to discuss the incident. Here's what Sandusky said.
Yeah, he was concerned. He was concerned about it, yeah.
Did he talk about horseplay? How did he couch it when he raised it with you, in other words? He must have said, you're saying he certainly didn't say what's being said today. So what did he say? Just that somebody was uncomfortable and...
Well, he was coming to me with a concern. He was coming to me with a concern because, and I guess in his words, somebody had talked to him about inappropriate behavior in the shower. So
and you told him I
told him that it didn't happen, and there wasn't, in my mind, there wasn't inappropriate behavior, and I said, if you want, you could speak to the young person that was involved.
I asked what restrictions Curley put on Sandusky, who by then was retired yet still had access to the university's facilities.
Right, he didn't want me to bring kids in there and work them out anymore. And I remember saying, well, could I just work them out? And he said, no.
And then, what, did he take your keys? Or you were able to keep going there?
No,
right?
he didn't take my keys. I still have my keys.
Okay.
And I still went in there and worked out.
Prosecutors say all the alleged victims passed through Sandusky's Second Mile program.
Talk to me, if you will, about how you kind of physically interacted with kids and how sort of to understand that within the context of the Second Mile. Because I think some of the things, if you don't have any context, might seem to some people showering with kids, blowing on their stomach, bear hugging them, might to some people in a vacuum seem strange.
I wasn't playing. I mean, that was just me. I don't know. Like I said, I grew up at a recreation center. There was constant activity. I worked on a playground. I loved active kids.
Pressed further about his physical interaction with Second Mile children, he had this to say.
The environment was family-like. I mean, and I guess, in times that you had with them, you always, all the times were precious times. They were significant times because they weren't going to have you and you weren't going to have them. So it was significant times. It was important times, and so I guess it just happened that way. I don't know. That's kind of...
Sandusky maintains his innocence and remains out on bail while state prosecutors build their case. He has only spoken out one other time since his arrest in a phone interview with Bob Costas on NBC.
Are you sexually attracted to young boys, to underage boys?
Am I sexually attracted to
Yes.
underage boys? Sexually attracted? No, I enjoy young people.
I'm sitting there saying, well, what in the world is this question? You know, what is, you know, am I going to be, if I say, no, I'm not attracted to boys, that's not the truth, because I'm attracted to young people, boys, girls.
Yeah, but not sexually. You're attracted because you enjoy spending time.
Right, I enjoy, that's what I was trying to say. I enjoy spending time with young people. I enjoy spending time with people. I mean, my two favorite groups are the elderly and the young. The young because they don't think about what they say, and the old because they don't care. You know, so those, I love being around both those groups of people, because, and neither one of them are going anywhere. They're not caught up like all of us in trying to make a living and trying to impress people. They are who they are, and that's why I love those groups. Those are my two favorite groups of people. Sit down, boy. Oh, you're gonna lay down. I miss coaching. I miss second mile. I miss second mile kids. I miss interrelationships with all kinds of people. I miss my own grandkids. I miss. I don't miss my dog. So I mean, good grief.
This is an ABC News interview with victim number 1, Aaron Fisher.
Now we're going to turn to the Jerry Sandusky case and our bombshell interview with the young man who was known as victim number 1. His allegations against the former Penn State football coach triggered the investigation that led to Sandusky's trial and his sentence of life behind bars. Well, now victim number 1 is going public in a book called Silent No More. He is sure to create even more shockwaves with what he says, and he broke his silence to 2020 anchor Chris Cuomo. Good morning, Chris.
Good morning, Elizabeth. This is clearly David and Goliath, except there were many Goliaths. Remember, this is a kid who took on a coach connected to a university that dominates his hometown. All its credibility, prestige, and power against him. But he had something that trumped it all. He had courage, and he had the truth. The trial of convicted child molester and former Penn State football coach Jerry Sandusky may never have happened if not for this brave young man. Aaron Fisher was the first to accuse Sandusky of being a monster, a key witness at trial. And now he wants everyone to know how hard it was to bring Sandusky down.
A victim means people feel sympathy for you. I don't want that. I would rather be somebody that did something good.
Aaron is 18, but was just 11 when he first met Sandusky, after he was invited to a summer camp for the coach's charity, the Second Mile. Sandusky soon targeted him, showering the boy with special attention, pulling Aaron out of school during the day, sleepovers at his home on weekends. It was there in his basement that Sandusky victimized Aaron. But you weren't able to say,
No.
This guy is a monster, he's sexually assaulting me.
I couldn't do it.
Why?
Embarrassment, fear of not being believed.
That fear kept Aaron silent for years. But eventually, he would gather the strength to stand up to the powerful football coach, telling his principal what was happening during a meeting at school. And that is when his mother says Aaron was betrayed again.
They tell me to go home and think about it.
Go home and think about what?
That's what I said. Go home and think about what? What is there to think about? We need to call the police right now. Jerry was in the school.
We found Principal Karen Probst, who is still working at Aaron's old school. Why are you moving so fast now when you moved so slowly when Aaron needed your help? I don't understand this. Why would you avoid these questions? The school says it did appropriately respond and it reported the allegations immediately. However, as you could see, they didn't want to talk to us about it. Now, here's the key. This is an accountability story. Aaron says there are others who betrayed them who have never been held to answer for what happened in his situation.
A young man filed a lawsuit against Sandusky in Philadelphia. He was not involved in the grand jury investigation. His involvement with the Second Mile began in 1992 when he was 10 years old. He said Sandusky took him to Penn State games, Nittany Lions games, and even to games by the Philadelphia Eagles. He said he was sexually abused by Sandusky at least 100 times. He said the abuse took place at Penn State facilities and at Sandusky's house. It occurred over a span of 4 years, up to 1996. He kept the abuse a secret for over 15 years because Sandusky threatened to harm his family if he reported what had been done to him. Another victim testified, this time to the grand jury. He, too, was 10 years old when Sandusky began to subject him to sexual abuse. He was welcomed warmly to the second mile and felt personally accepted by Sandusky. Eventually, Sandusky would begin touching him inappropriately in his car. He would stroke his leg and put his hand down his pants. The abuse also took place in a locker room at Penn State and in Sandusky's house. He said that after retiring to bed at Sandusky's house, the coach would get into the bed and envelop his body with his own. Sandusky did abuse boys younger than 10 years. One victim reported that he became involved with the second mile when he was 8 years old. Sandusky took him to football games before he began molesting him incrementally. He said that one day while they were taking a shower together, Sandusky touched his body with his erect penis. The boy broke from his grasp and asked to be taken home. Sandusky never invited him out again. A boy who was 12 or 13 when he was engaged by the second mile did not experience anything aberrant during the first 3 years of his association with Jerry Sandusky. Then, one day, they were horsing around in the pool when Sandusky grabbed his testicles. The abuse escalated as it occurred in Penn State showers and the Sandusky homestead. Sandusky invited the young man and his family to attend bowl games in Orlando in 1998 and San Antonio in 1999. The victim said Sandusky visited his room and told him that if he rejected his sexual advances, he would send him home. In 1997, a boy was referred to the second mile by a guidance counselor due to the fact that he had problems at home and needed the support he wasn't getting. At first, Sandusky gave him that support and comfort. He incorporated physical affection in stages, which gradually became more and more sexual. At first, it was just hugs, tickling, cuddling, and rubbing of a non-sexual nature. Then, when the boy spent the night in Sandusky's house, he was molested by him. The abuse went on for 3 years. It escalated to the point where he was forced to perform fellatio on Sandusky. One of the most truthful statements Sandusky made about himself was written as part of his autobiography. At the times when I found myself searching for maturity, I usually came up with insanity. A victim who was not part of the grand jury investigation and trial testified that he was abused by Sandusky in 2004, though he did not initiate litigation until 2011. As his lawyer described the abuse, he gets him in a room. He's on one side of the desk. The boy is on the other. He proceeded to engage him in conversation. He had lost his mother. His mother died the year before. He had a very hard time. They were very close. They talked for a while about that. Then he pulled out a glass with alcohol in it and told him to drink it. Then he sodomized him. Once he was finished anally raping the boy, he gave him some sports memorabilia and took him back to the second mile camp from whence he came. The jury at Jerry Sandusky's trial was comprised of 7 women and 5 men who deliberated for 21 hours. On June 22, 2012, they announced a verdict of guilty for 45 of the 48 charges. The charges for which Sandusky was convicted are as follows: 8 counts of involuntary deviant sexual intercourse, 7 counts of indecent assault, 1 count of criminal intent to commit indecent assault, 9 counts of unlawful contact with minors, 10 counts of corruption of minors, and 10 counts of endangering the welfare of children. Under Pennsylvania's Megan's Law, Sandusky was legally designated a sexually violent predator. He was sentenced to serve at least 30 years in prison. He will either die in prison, or if he is released, he will be in his 90s. If he is released before death, he will have to register as a sex offender. Given his sexually violent predator status, he is unlikely to ever be released. June 2012, Penn State University introduced a policy that made it mandatory for sexual abuse being carried out against a child by a Penn State employee to be reported to the authorities. All employees would also be required to undergo a criminal background check. The following were introduced as sanctions against the Penn State football program. Among others, 5 years probation, a 4-year postseason ban, vacating of all wins from 1998 to 2011, representing 112 wins in total, a $60 million fine. All tributes to Joe Paterno and Jerry Sandusky, such as statues, murals, and more, were all taken down and/or erased. After Paterno was fired due to his role in the cover-up, he said this: "My name. I have spent my whole life trying to make that name mean something, and now it's gone." Joe Paterno died on January 22nd, 2012, of cancer at the age of 85. Jerry Sandusky continues to rot in prison to this day. Undoubtedly, he is in administrative segregation due to being widely known as a child rapist. The Second Mile was shut down in 2016 after serving more than 300,000 at-risk youth. On paper, its intentions were noble, but ultimately, it became little more than a predator's playground. Thank you for listening to Human Monsters. Bye for now.